Solano Lopes spent some time in Europe and, after taking the office, decided to adopt the Prussian system of military organization, which in theory made the Paraguayan army based in quality, and it makes sense because if you compare Paraguay and Prussia, both were nations with mostly flat lands, no natural protection, low manpower, and making borders with bigger regional powers. In his presidency, Lopez opted to continue most of the policies of economic protectionism and internal development adopted by his predecessors. However, he broke sharply with the traditional policy of strict isolationism in foreign affairs that was favored by the previous Paraguayan leaders. Lopez instead embarked on a more activist approach to internal policy. He had as his great ambition to position Paraguay as an incredible third force in the ongoing rivalry between Argentina and the Empire of Brazil over control of the Rio de la Plata basin. Rio de la Plata held great strategic importance for Paraguay, mainly because Paraguay was a landlocked nation, and it was the only access Paraguay had to the sea. The main idea was Paraguay wanted to install a pro-Paraguayan regime in Uruguay to favor its access to the region, which the problem was the Empire of Brazil opposed it, supporting a pro-Brazilian government, the Colorado Party in Uruguay. When Brazil invaded Uruguay to support its allies there, Lopes formally declared war on the Brazilian Empire. Lopes dispatched a force to invade Mato Grosso, a region in Brazil. The force seized and sacked the town of Corumbá and took possession of the province and its diamond mines. Together with an immense quantity of arms and ammunition, including enough gunpowder to last the whole Paraguayan army for at least a year of active war. In the last 10 years, Paraguayan army made his army grow from 10,000 men to about 8,000 men, and in contrast, at the beginning of the war, the military force of the Brazilian Empire was about 16,000 men. The only advantage Brazil had was in its navy, comprising of 45 ships with 239 cannons and about 4,000 well-trained crew. In the short term, Paraguay had an advantage, but Paraguay population before of the war was about 500,000 people, and Brazil was about 9 million people. Brazilian economy was also way bigger than the Paraguay one. Also, it's good to mention that most of the Brazilian population and economic center was concentrated in the coast, close to the sea, very far away from Paraguay, which means Brazil could afford to trade land and manpower for time, unlike Paraguay. Despite all odds against Paraguay fighting the biggest regional power in South America, Lopes wanted to send part of his forces to help his allies in Uruguay. But for that, he needed military access from Argentina, which they denied. By this time, the Brazilians managed to successfully topple Aguirre and install their ally Venancio Flores as president, rendering Uruguay little more than a Brazilian puppet state. The Paraguayan Congress, summoned by Lopes, gave him the title of Marshal President of the Paraguayan armies, giving him extraordinary war powers. With these amazing powers, Solano Lopes now decided that it was a good idea to declare war on Argentina, which was the second biggest power in South America, with an economy and population bigger than Paraguay. Now Paraguay, led by Solano Lopes, faced the Triple Alliance, which was made of Brazil and Argentina, the two most powerful nations in South America, and Uruguay. The Triple Alliance, led by the Empire of Brazil, was able to raise an army of about 200,000 Brazilian soldiers, which most recruits were slaves and landless that was promised freedom and land after the war. Argentina and Uruguay were able to raise about 40,000 men. After Paraguay being pushed back to its territory and a series of battles now in Paraguayan soil, which mostly of these Paraguay lost, Solano Lopes, seeing the situation of his country, refusing the unconditional surrender imposed by the Allies, decided to keep the fight. But now, due to the high losses and low manpower, mostly of the Paraguayan ranks were filled by underage men and children. The war caused a lot of devastation for Paraguay. The only thing that prevented the full annexation of Paraguay was Brazil, who wanted a buffer state between Argentina and Brazil. But nowadays, Paraguay has a lot of influence from Brazil. Mostly of the farmers owners there are actual Brazilians, for example. So that's the end of the video. So it is interesting to see like how a war basically turned into a genocide, mainly because of the actions of Solano Lopes to keep the fighting instead of accepting the unconditional surrender.